On the night of my father's retirement party, he raised a glass in front of 87 guests and called me the family failure. The banquet room was full of blue balloons, silver streamers, old factory photos, and people who had spent 30 years telling my father he was the kind of man who built something from nothing. He stood beside a 3-tier cake shaped like the Bennett Machine Works logo and smiled at my brother Mason like the future had already been delivered into safe hands. Then he looked at me. "I am proud of every child I raised," he said, voice carrying over the clinking silverware, "except the one who ran away from real work and came back with nothing but excuses and spreadsheets. Nobody defended me, not my brother, not my aunt. Not the shop foreman who knew I had been inside the books for 6 months. Not even my father's second wife, who looked down at her plate like silence had been assigned seating." I smiled. I reached into my bag, took out a navy folder, and placed it beside his retirement cake. "Happy retirement, Dad," I said. Then I walked out before anyone could see my hands shake. I had only made it halfway across the parking lot when the banquet hall doors flew open behind me. My father's voice cracked through the night. "Mason, what the hell did you do?" The parking lot went still. Guests turned. A waiter froze with a tray of coffee cups. Someone's car alarm chirped once and died. Because inside that folder were 3 things my family had never expected from me: a pension audit, a forged signature report, and proof that the daughter they called a failure had secretly saved every retirement check in that room, including my father's. My name is Natalie Bennett. I am 35 years old, and I work as an employee benefits forensic analyst in Columbus, Ohio. That means companies call me when retirement plans, payroll accounts, health benefit funds, or executive bonus pools stop matching the story people have been telling themselves. I find missing money. That job made me useful to strangers and offensive to my family. My father, Raymond Bennett, founded Bennett Machine Works in 1989 with 2 lathes, 1 bank loan, and the stubborn belief that a man who could fix anything deserved to own something. By the time I was in high school, the shop had grown into a respected precision parts manufacturer outside Dayton. Nothing fancy from the road: flat roof, brick front, loading dock, American flag, coffee that could remove paint. But inside, it was my father's kingdom. He built brackets, valve housings, surgical tool components, custom parts for agricultural equipment, and his own legend: Ray Bennett was the man who never missed payroll. Ray Bennett knew every employee's kid by name. Ray Bennett gave turkeys at Thanksgiving, cash bonuses at Christmas, and speeches about loyalty that made grown machinists clap him on the shoulder. In our town, my father was not rich exactly. He was respected, which meant more to him. My older brother Mason inherited the smile, the handshake, and the belief that respect could be worn like a jacket without being earned. He was 2 years older than me and somehow younger forever. Mason got second chances. I got responsibilities. Mason forgot forms. I filled them out. Mason wrecked Dad's truck. I learned to drive the forklift. Mason missed shifts because he was networking. I worked summers doing inventory counts in a building that smelled like cutting oil and hot metal. Dad called Mason a natural leader. He called me book smart, which in his mouth meant almost human. I wanted him to be proud of me anyway. That was my first bad investment. When I was 22, I left the shop and went to graduate school for accounting and benefits compliance. My father treated it like betrayal. "You have a place here," he said the night before I drove to Columbus. He was standing in the loading dock doorway, arms crossed, fluorescent light turning his hair silver at the edges. Real work, real people. Not office games. I am still doing real work. "You are running from this family." "No, Dad. I am building something of my own." He laughed once. Not cruel exactly. Worse. Dismissive. "With spreadsheets?" I said yes. He never forgave me for that answer. Mason stayed at Bennett Machine Works. Of course he did. He became operations manager, then vice president of business development, which meant he took clients golfing and asked other people why invoices were late. Dad told everyone Mason had loyalty in his bones. My leaving became the family cautionary tale. Natalie chose numbers over blood. Natalie thought she was too good for the shop. Natalie forgot who fed her. Never mind that the shop paid Mason a salary and paid me in guilt. For years I kept showing up anyway. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Dad's birthdays, company picnics. Retirement plan annual meetings if the third-party administrator needed a signature Dad did not understand. I answered questions when payroll got weird, corrected tax forms quietly, and ignored every joke about me checking the napkins for depreciation. My mother, Evelyn, had been the only person who understood. She died when I was 27, ovarian cancer, fast and merciless. Before she died, she squeezed my hand and said, "Your father loves in the language he knows. That does not mean you have to accept being misnamed." Misnamed. I thought she meant failure. Later, I understood she meant useful. The word my family used when they wanted my labor without my authority. After Mom died, Dad married Lorraine 3 years later. Not a bad woman, just careful. She loved the comfort of my father's reputation and had no interest in questioning how it stayed polished. Mason called her the peacekeeper. She kept peace by agreeing with the loudest Bennett man in the room. That was never me. The first sign something was wrong came from a retired machinist named Victor Alvarez. Victor had worked at Bennett Machine Works for 28 years. He taught me how to deburr edges when I was 14 and told me never to put my fingers where I would not put a carrot. He retired in March, 2 years before Dad's party, with a bad shoulder and the kind of pride that makes men shake hands too firmly even when pain shoots up their arm. He called me on a Tuesday morning. "Natalie," he said, "your daddy's plan administrator is telling me my account balance is lower than last quarter." "That right?" I was in a conference room in Columbus reviewing benefit corrections for a restaurant chain. "How much lower?" Enough that my wife stopped talking for 10 minutes. That told me more than any number. I told Victor to send me the statement. He hesitated. "I do not want to make trouble. Victor, if your retirement account is wrong..." "Trouble already exists." He emailed the statement. I opened it at lunch and felt my body go still. The plan balance had not just moved with the market. There were irregular loan offsets, administrative adjustments, and something labeled employer correction pending. None of those belonged in Victor's account without documentation. I asked if anyone at the company had explained. He said Mason told retirees not to worry because the system was updating. The system was updating. I have built a career around sentences like that. Vague enough to calm people. Meaningless enough to hide fraud. I called Dad that evening. Victor sent me his 401 statement. "Something is wrong," Dad sighed. "Natalie, do not start." "Dad, retirement accounts do not just lose tracked funds under correction pending. Mason and the administrator are handling it." "Have you seen the file?" He went quiet. Then, "Your brother is running operations. Stop looking for ways to prove he cannot." I stared at the wall of my apartment. "I am looking for money, Dad, not moral victory." He hung up on me. I should have walked away then. I had no duty to investigate a company that had spent years using my expertise like an emergency tool and my presence like an embarrassment. But Victor called again the next week. Then Elaine from assembly, then Paul, who ran shipping and had put 3 daughters through community college on overtime. Their statements were all wrong in slightly different ways. That is how fraud introduces itself when it wants time, not one impossible number. Many plausible wrong ones. I called the plan administrator directly and introduced myself as a benefits analyst and daughter of the owner. That second part got me transferred faster than it should have. The representative would not release confidential information correctly, but she did confirm that recent company communications had come from Mason Bennett, with authorization forms attached. She mentioned a pending employer restoration schedule and a temporary liquidity event. Temporary liquidity event. That phrase made my stomach drop. Retirement plans do not have liquidity events because an operations manager needs cash. Employees' retirement contributions are not a corporate rainy day jar. They are protected assets, fiduciary money, dangerous money to touch, legally and morally. I drove to Dayton that Friday and went to the shop. Mason was in Dad's old office, feet on the desk, talking loudly into a headset. The walls had changed since I left. Dad's framed founding photo was gone from the center wall, moved to the side. Mason had put up a mock-up of a new logo. BMW Precision. I stood in the doorway and watched my brother sell a future he had not earned. He muted the call. "Look who came down from Spreadsheet Mountain. Where is Dad?" "Doctor appointment. I need the retirement plan files." He laughed. No, you don't, Mason. His smile changed. You do not work here. I know. That is why I am still allowed to ask questions without being personally liable. That got through. Not because he respected the law. Because he heard the word liable. He stood. The plan is fine. Then show me. He walked toward the door, forcing me to step back or be hit by his shoulder. You always do this. You turn family into an audit. No, Mason. I audit when family turns into risk. He leaned close. Dad is retiring next year. He wants peace. If you ruin that with your paranoia, that is on you. Then he left me standing outside the office where I used to help Dad sort invoices on summer afternoons. I did not get the files from Mason. I got them from Denise. Denise Porter had been payroll supervisor at Bennett Machine Works for 19 years. She wore cardigans year-round because the front office was always cold, kept licorice in her bottom drawer, and knew where every body was buried because payroll people always do. She found me in the parking lot. You did not hear this from me, she said. Hear what? She handed me a flash drive. Her hand shook. I am retiring in 18 months. My husband says do not get involved. But I looked at the contribution reports. They do not reconcile. I took the drive. Denise. She looked at the shop door. Mason said temporary. He said the money would be back before statements went out. Then statements went out. What did Dad say? Her eyes filled with tears. I do not think Ray knows. That was the first mercy and the first horror. Dad did not know. Mason had used Dad's trust, Dad's reputation, Dad's signature authority, and employee money to cover something. I just did not know what yet. That night in my hotel room, I opened the files. Payroll contribution reports, wire confirmations, plan remittance schedules, internal emails, scanned authorization forms, a line of missing deposits stretching across months, employee contributions withheld from paychecks but not remitted on time, employer match delayed, loan repayment funds misapplied, a plan asset account temporarily swept into the operating account under the label Cash Bridge. Cash Bridge. It is amazing how gentle theft sounds when you give it office words. At the center of it all were 3 authorization forms carrying my father's signature. I zoomed in until the screen blurred. The first signature looked like Dad's. The second looked like Dad's if his wrist had been moving too fast. The third did not look like Dad's at all. The R was wrong. My father's R has a stubborn leg that drops below the line because he learned cursive from a nun who believed letters needed discipline. This R floated. I printed it at the hotel business center and stared at it until midnight. Then I called my mother's old attorney. Ruth Kellerman. Ruth had handled Mom's estate. She was 70, blunt, and allergic to family excuses. I told her what I had. She said, do not confront, preserve, verify, then decide whether you are saving the company or burning it down. I want to save the employees. That is not the same thing. I looked at Dad's fake signature on the desk. No, I said. It is not. The investigation took 5 months. I did it quietly, after work, on weekends, during lunch breaks, in hotel rooms and my own kitchen, with Ruth advising where legal exposure lived and where my emotions needed to stay out of the file. Denise fed me reports. Victor and 2 other retirees authorized me to review their statements. A contact at the plan administrator confirmed late remittance correction requirements. A forensic document examiner compared Dad's known signatures with the questionable forms. A banking consultant traced transfers through operating accounts. The pattern became clear. Mason had overextended the company on a private expansion deal Dad had never approved. He bought 2 used CNC machines through a financing arrangement tied to a side entity called MB Growth Partners. MB. Mason Bennett. Growth Partners sounded better than panic in a suit. The machines were supposed to produce parts for a new aerospace client. The client never signed. The machines sat under tarps behind the shop while payments came due. To cover the shortfall, Mason delayed remitting employee retirement contributions, moved loan repayments through the operating account, and created fake temporary approvals using Dad's signature. He told himself the next contract would fix it. Then the next. Then the next. Fraud often begins as a bridge built by someone convinced the river is narrow. By the time I finished the first draft of the report, $318,760 had been delayed, misapplied, or improperly swept. Not all gone forever. Some had been restored late. Some could be corrected with penalties, but if regulators discovered the pattern before correction, Dad's company could face audits, lawsuits, excise taxes, fiduciary claims, and possibly criminal referral depending on intent and documentation. Dad's retirement party was already on the calendar. That was the bitter little joke. The man everyone believed had protected generations of workers was about to retire under a plan his son had quietly damaged. I had a choice. I could report everything immediately and let the Department of Labor tear through Bennett Machine Works like a storm. That might be morally clean. It might also freeze accounts, destroy the company, and put employees in limbo while lawyers fed on the wreckage. Or I could force a voluntary correction, restore the funds, document the fraud, remove Mason from plan authority, and preserve every employee's retirement before the public collapse. Ruth said, "The cleanest solution is not always the loudest, but do not confuse quiet correction with family cover-up." So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I used my own money first. I did not have $318,760 lying around like emergency flour. I had savings, a taxable investment account, equity in my condo, a retirement account I did not want to touch and ultimately did not have to, thanks to Ruth finding a bridge option through a private compliance correction lender that worked with benefit plan restorations. I took a personal line of credit against my condo, liquidated investments, and structured a temporary restoration deposit through an escrow account managed by Ruth's firm. The money went into the retirement plan, not the company. That mattered. Every restored dollar had a paper trail. Employee accounts were corrected first, retirees' balances adjusted, late remittance penalties calculated, lost earnings restored. The voluntary correction package began before regulators came knocking. I did not sign anything as company officer. I was not one. I signed as funding source for the corrective deposit under a reimbursement agreement Ruth drafted against company assets and Mason's side entity if fraud was proven internally. Denise cried when the first corrected statements generated. Victor called me after receiving his. "My wife is talking again," he said. I laughed and cried at the same time. Dad still did not know. Mason knew something had shifted because his access began narrowing. The plan administrator requested additional verification. Denise stopped processing anything without dual approval. Ruth sent preservation letters that did not name me. Mason called me one night, furious. "What are you doing?" I was in my kitchen, the correction binder open in front of me. "I am making sure people get what they earned. Stay out of my company." It is Dad's company. Not for long. That sentence went into my notes. Not for long. A week later, Dad announced his retirement party for early June. A celebration of legacy, he called it. Mason began pushing transfer documents. He wanted Dad to sign over controlling shares before the party so the announcement could be made publicly. Dad, tired and proud and ready to believe the son who stayed had earned the keys, agreed in principle. Mason had not expected benefit plan restrictions to slow the transfer. He had not expected Ruth's letters. He had not expected Denise to grow a spine. He had not expected me to have documents. Men like Mason do not fear women they have successfully made invisible. That was his mistake. I tried to tell my father twice before the party. The first time was at his house, 3 weeks before retirement night. Lorraine answered the door and called into the kitchen. "Ray, Natalie is here with one of her serious faces." She meant it playfully, maybe. It still landed exactly where old jokes always land. Dad was at the table, sorting old shop photos for the slideshow. Mason as a teenager in safety goggles, Dad holding the first company sign. Me at 12, hair in a ponytail, standing beside a pallet jack with a clipboard in my hands. I had forgotten that photo existed. "I need to talk to you about the retirement plan," I said. Dad sighed. "Natalie, please," Mason said. "You have been stirring things up with Denise. Denise found issues because there are issues. Mason has it handled." "No, he does not." Dad stood. He still had the ability to fill a kitchen with anger without moving much. "Your brother stayed when you left. You do not get to come back now and tell me he cannot run the place. This is not about staying. This is about signatures." His face hardened. "You always did think paperwork mattered more than people." I wanted to scream that paperwork was how people kept their pensions, their houses, their medical benefits, their futures. Paperwork was not the opposite of care. It was care made enforceable. Instead, I opened my folder. He did not look down. "Get out," he said. Lorraine whispered, "Ray." He pointed to the door. I left. The second time was by phone, 4 days before the party. I said, "Dad, if you sign anything Mason gives you before Ruth reviews it, you could be handing him control of a problem you do not understand." He said, "I understand my children better than you think." "No, Dad, you understand the ones who flatter you." He went silent. Then he said, "Do not come to my retirement party if you plan to poison it." I went anyway. Not because I still wanted approval, because the employees would be there. Retirees, vendors, neighbors, every person whose money had been touched and restored in the dark. If Mason tried to turn that party into a coronation, I needed to be in the room. I packed the Navy folder before leaving, not to use it. At least that is what I told myself. The party was held at the Willow Creek Banquet Hall, the same place every retirement, quinceañera, scholarship dinner, and small-town political fundraiser within 30 miles eventually seems to land. The carpet was burgundy. The lights were too warm. The chicken was dry. The cake was impressive because Lorraine had insisted on ordering it from a bakery 2 towns over, shaped like a miniature factory with silver frosting windows. Old employees filled half the room. Current staff filled the other. Family took the front tables because family always takes the front tables even when it has done the least. Mason stood beside Dad in a charcoal suit, shaking hands like a candidate. His wife Priya stood near the cake, smiling tightly. She is not cruel. That matters. Priya married Mason believing his confidence was stability. By the time she understood the difference, they had 2 children and 3 loans. My younger sister Hannah sat with her husband near the wall. Hannah is the child nobody talks about much because she moved to Michigan, teaches art, and refuses to attend family trials unless dessert is involved. She hugged me when I arrived and whispered, "He has been impossible all week." "Dad?" "'S Mason." I nodded. Mason saw me and his smile thinned. "You came, so did the pensioners." His eyes flicked around. "Do not embarrass yourself tonight." "I rarely do that by accident." He leaned closer. "Dad is announcing the transition. Do not ruin his moment. There should not be a transition until the planned correction is complete." His jaw tightened. "You do not know what is complete. I know more than you think." He looked at my bag. For 1 second, fear. Then Dad called him over, and the mask returned. Dinner passed like most family events. Everyone talking around the one thing rotting under the table. Dad gave short speeches at each table. Lorraine dabbed her eyes. Retirees told stories about midnight repairs and first paychecks, and the year Dad kept everyone employed during a downturn. I listened, and despite everything, I felt pride. That is the cruelest part of family betrayal. The person who hurts you is rarely only the hurt. My father had built something. He had kept people employed. He had taught me work mattered. He had also called me cold for using the skills he helped create. Both were true. Truth does not become simpler because pain wants a villain. Then the slideshow began. Photo after photo of the shop. Dad, Mason, employees, machines. Dad again, Mason again. There was one photo of me, 12 years old, ponytail, clipboard. The room laughed affectionately when it appeared. Dad said into the microphone, "Even then she was checking up on us." Everyone laughed harder. I did not. After the slideshow, Lorraine tapped her glass for attention. She praised Dad's sacrifice, his faith, his stubbornness, his love for the company. Then she introduced Mason as the son who would carry the Bennett name forward, not the company yet, but almost. Mason gave a modest little speech that made my skin itch. He talked about modernizing without forgetting roots, about loyalty, about Dad trusting him, about the next generation. He mentioned employees, community, and stewardship. He did not mention retirement plan corrections, forged signatures, side entities, missing deposits, or the private lenders waiting for repayment. Then he said, "Dad always taught us that the people who stay are the people who build." The room clapped. I looked at my father. He was glowing. That was when I knew my first plan had failed. My first plan had been quiet correction, private truth, controlled transition, retirement protected, company preserved. But Mason was not retreating. He was advancing. He was using applause to push Dad across the line before the paperwork could stop him. Ruth had warned me. If Mason makes a public transition announcement before review, he creates reliance. Investors, clients, employees. Undoing it becomes harder. I had asked, "What do I do if that happens?" She had said, "Bring sunlight." Sunlight was in my bag. Dad took the microphone again near the cake. He thanked everyone. He talked about 35 years of work. He said no man builds anything alone. He thanked Lorraine. He thanked long-term employees. He thanked Mason for staying. He thanked Hannah for bringing beauty into the family, which made Hannah snort quietly, because she hates that kind of sentence. Then he looked for me. I knew before he said it, maybe because I had been hearing versions of it for years. Maybe because Mason's face changed into that almost smile he wore whenever someone else did the cutting. Dad raised his glass. "I am proud of every child I raised," he said. "Proud of Mason for taking on the weight of real work. Proud of Hannah for her family and her teaching. Proud of every child except the one standing by the cake, who thought she was too smart for us and came back with nothing but warnings and spreadsheets." The room went still. He continued, "Because cruelty loves a second sentence once it realizes nobody stopped the first. Natalie, maybe one day you will understand that building something takes more than finding fault." Nobody defended me. Hannah half stood, but her husband touched her arm and she froze. Victor looked down. Denise closed her eyes. Lorraine stared at her plate. Mason watched me like he was enjoying a debt being paid in public. I breathed once, then I smiled. I walked to the cake table slowly enough that nobody could call it a scene. My father's eyes narrowed as I approached. He expected argument, tears. Maybe the brittle lecture he could dismiss later as hysterical. He expected the daughter he had been describing for years to finally perform the role in front of witnesses. I did not. I took the navy folder from my bag. It was ordinary, clean, no label on the front. Inside were copies, not originals. I had learned enough from Ruth to never hand a volatile man the only copy of anything important. I placed it beside the cake knife. "Happy retirement, Dad," I said. His mouth tightened. "What is this?" "Something Mason should have shown you before tonight." Mason stepped forward. "Natalie." I turned to him. "No," that one word stopped him, not because it was loud, because it contained years. I looked back at my father. "Open it when you are ready." Then I walked out. Hannah whispered my name as I passed, but I did not stop. I kept my shoulders level. I kept my face calm. The banquet hall doors opened with a soft pneumatic hiss, and cool evening air hit me like mercy. The parking lot was half full, sky purple over the highway, cicadas screaming in the grass beyond the asphalt. I walked toward my car under lights that flickered every few seconds. My hands shook once I was outside. I pressed them against my dress until they stopped enough to unlock the door. Inside the hall, there was silence, then muffled voices, then my father's roar. Not words at first, just sound. A sound so raw it made two people near the entrance turn around. The banquet hall doors burst open. Mason came out first, face gray, moving backward as if my father's anger had physical force. Dad followed, folder in one hand, 3 papers in the other. "Mason," he shouted, "what the hell did you do?" Guests came out behind him in clusters. Victor, Denise, Hannah, Lorraine. Priya, pale and stunned. The banquet staff froze near the coffee station. Outside the glass doors, a family from another event stopped to stare. Dad held up the forged authorization report. "Did you sign my name?" Mason said. "Dad, not here. Did you sign my name?" The second time, everyone heard. Mason looks around and finally understood what public meant when it was not flattering him. I stood beside my car, keys in hand, and watched the story my family had told about itself begin to fall apart under parking lot lights. Dad had opened the folder to page 1 first, the executive summary Ruth had forced me to write in plain language. Bennett Machine Works employee retirement plan experienced improper delays and misapplications of employee retirement contributions and loan repayments, totaling $318,760. Funds have been restored through corrective deposit, funded by Natalie Bennett pending recovery. Supporting documentation indicates unauthorized internal transfers and forged signature authority linked to Mason Bennett and MB Growth Partners. Plain language. Ruth believed plain language was a weapon when used correctly. Page 2 was the pension correction confirmation. Restored balances, lost earnings, late contribution calculations, voluntary correction file. Page 3 was the forged signature analysis. Page 4 was the transfer map showing money flowing from retirement plan accounts to the operating account, then to MB Growth Partners, then to equipment financing and vendor payments tied to Mason's failed expansion. Page 5 was the proposed ownership transfer Mason had planned to have Dad sign after the party. That last page was what made Dad scream loud enough for the other banquet room to empty. Mason had not only damaged the retirement plan, he had planned to take control before the correction became public, then structure the company sale as modernization financing. In simple terms, use Dad's reputation, employee money, and corporate assets to cover his own side deal, then emerge as successor before anyone realized the floor had rotted. Dad read the transfer page under the parking lot light, hands shaking. "You were going to make me sign this tonight?" Mason said. "It was to protect the company. From what? You?" Mason's face collapsed for half a second before anger rebuilt it. "You do not understand the market. You do not understand what it takes now. I was trying to save us." I laughed softly from beside my car. Everyone looked at me. Mason's eyes flashed. "You stay out of this," I said. "I paid to get in." That was the first time my father looked at me after opening the folder, really looked, not at the failure, not at the girl with spreadsheets. At the woman whose name was on the restoration deposit, his voice broke. "Natalie, what does that mean?" "It means Victor's retirement check is safe. Denise's account is safe. Paul's loan repayments are corrected. Your employees are protected. Your retirement is protected. The company has a chance because the money is back where it belongs." "How?" I looked at him for a long time, then I answered the way numbers answer. "I funded the correction. Ruth structured it. Denise documented it. Mason caused it." The parking lot went silent in the way rooms go silent when people realize they laughed too early. Victor stepped forward first. He had been quiet since dinner, but now his face had changed. He looked at me with a gratitude that made my throat close. "You fixed my account?" he asked. "I helped correct the plan." "Do not talk like a report girl. Did you fix it?" I nodded. His eyes filled. He turned toward Dad. "Ray, your daughter is the reason my wife and I are not selling our house." Dad flinched like the words hit him physically. Denise stepped out next. Her voice shook, but she spoke. "Natalie brought in Ruth before the regulators found it. She protected the employees. Mason told me to process transfers I knew were wrong. I should have spoken sooner." Mason spun on her. "Denise, shut your mouth." My father moved so fast for an older man that Mason actually stepped back. "Do not speak to her," Dad said. It was the first time in my life I had heard my father defend a woman against Mason. Too late to heal everything. Not too late to matter. Hannah came to stand beside me then. She did not ask. She simply stood there, shoulder to shoulder, and said, "I wanted to say something inside. I know, I froze. I know, I am sorry, so." I believed her. Lorraine hovered near the door, hand at her throat. She looked at me like I had become dangerous by becoming visible. Priya stood near the curb, staring at Mason with a face I recognized. The face of a woman recalculating the cost of every excuse she had ever accepted. Mason tried one final story. "Natalie has hated me for years," he said to the crowd. "She is twisting compliance paperwork because she wants control." Ruth had anticipated that too. I opened my car door, reached into the passenger seat, and took out the second copy of the folder. I handed it to Victor. "Read page 8, I said. He did, slowly, lips moving slightly. Then he looked up. "Wire confirmations," he said. "Bank accounts. Dates." I looked at Mason. Paperwork is only twistable when nobody reads it. Mason lunged for the folder. Dad grabbed his arm. "Enough," Dad said. One word finally aimed at the right son. The fallout began before the party ended. Dad took Mason into a side room with Ruth on speakerphone because I called her the moment Dad said he wanted the truth. Mason's attorney was contacted before midnight. The planned transfer documents were frozen. Access to retirement plan accounts was revoked. Mason was removed from all plan authority by emergency board action the next morning. Denise became interim administrative contact with outside oversight. The voluntary correction package was finalized and expanded to include full disclosure of internal misconduct. Mason did not go to jail that night. Life is rarely that cinematic, but his world narrowed fast. MB Growth Partners collapsed within days. Creditors who had expected Bennett Machine Works assets to back Mason's promises found nothing but side entity debt and overvalued machines. Priya left with the children 2 weeks later, not because of the fraud alone, according to Hannah, but because Mason told her she was overreacting to paper problems. Paper problems had been paying for their groceries. Dad did not call me for 4 days. I did not call him. That silence felt different from our old silences. The old silence was punishment. This one was debris settling. On the 5th day, he came to my office. No appointment, no warning. Just my receptionist calling back to say, "There is a Mr. Bennett here. He says he is your father." I almost laughed at the formality. He looked smaller in my doorway. Not weak. Smaller. Like the legend had stepped out of him and left an old man holding a cap in both hands. He walked in slowly, eyes moving across my office, framed certifications, client files, whiteboard, tax manuals. The photograph of Mom I kept beside the window. He stopped at the photo. "She knew you would help," he said. I stood behind my desk. "Mom knew a lot of things you ignored." He nodded once. He deserved that. Then he placed an envelope on my desk. My breath caught. Inside was not money, not an apology letter. It was a copy of the speech he had given at the party, the page where he had written the line about me in pencil. Except the failure standing by the cake, he had crossed it out so hard the paper tore. Below it, in his heavy handwriting, he had written, "My daughter Natalie saved what I built when I was too proud to listen." He looked at me, eyes wet. "I am not good at saying things," he said. "No, I was wrong." The office went quiet, he continued, not just that night, before, for years. That was the first real apology my father ever gave me. I did not forgive him immediately. I want that clear. People who have never been publicly diminished by apparent love quick endings. They want the father to cry, the daughter to soften, the family to pose under a redeemed sunset. That is not how deep wounds close. Sometimes an apology is not medicine. Sometimes it is only the first clean instrument on the tray. I told Dad to sit. He sat like a client. Maybe that was fitting. I explained the repayment structure. The company would reimburse the corrective deposit over time under Ruth's supervision. Mason's side entity would be pursued for recovery where possible. Dad's retirement would be delayed 6 months, not canceled. Bennett Machine Works would survive if it accepted outside oversight and stopped treating loyalty as a substitute for controls. Dad listened, really listened. When I finished, he said, "Will you run it?" "No." His face changed. "I can help hire the people who should run it. I can sit on the oversight committee temporarily. But I will not give up my company to become the daughter who saves yours while everyone calls it family duty." He swallowed. I was going to ask. "I know. I am sorry. That sentence will need repetition. I know." That was new too. Before leaving, he touched the photo of Mom with 2 fingers. "She would have been proud of you." I felt anger rise so fast, it surprised me. "She was proud of me when she was alive. You were the one who needed documents." He closed his eyes, then he nodded. "You are right. Those 3 words did more than any speech. After he left, I shut my office door and cried for 20 minutes. Not because everything was fixed. Because part of me had been waiting since I was 22 to hear my father say I was right without adding a punishment to it. Grief is strange that way. It can arrive after victory. Looking for a chair, the employees learned the full safe version 2 weeks later. Dad held a meeting on the shop floor. Ruth stood near the wall. Denise held a clipboard. I stood in the back because I refused the front, and Dad respected that. He told them there had been improper handling of retirement contributions under Mason's authority. He said outside counsel had corrected the plan and protected balances. He said Mason was no longer employed by Bennett Machine Works. He said further oversight would be permanent. Then he stopped. I saw him grip the edge of the podium. "My daughter Natalie identified the problem and funded the correction before it damaged your retirements," he said. "I had not listened to her. That was my failure." The shop was quiet, machines off, fans humming. Men and women who had worked for my father for years, looking from him to me and back again. Victor started clapping, then Denise, then Paul. Then the shop floor filled with applause that felt nothing like the applause Mason received at the banquet hall. This was not performance. It was recognition. It was also uncomfortable. I am better with numbers than clapping. I wanted to disappear into the tool room. Dad looked at me. For once, he did not ask me to soften the moment for him. He let the room see me. Afterward, Victor hugged me so hard my ribs complained. Denise gave me licorice from her drawer. Paul said his wife wanted to send lasagna. Hannah called that night and said she was proud, then cried because she said she should have been proud louder. Sooner, Lorraine sent a text. I hope we can all move forward as a family, I replied. Moving forward requires telling the truth about what happened. She did not answer, Mason did. He sent one message from an unknown number. You ruined me. I wrote back. No. I documented you, then I blocked him. A year later, Bennett Machine Works still exists, not the way it did before. Smaller, cleaner, less mythological. The 2 unused CNC machines were sold at a loss, but the loss was survivable once it stopped being hidden. An outside CFO comes in twice a month. The retirement plan has independent fiduciary oversight. Denise retired on schedule and sends postcards from state parks. Victor still calls me every tax season even though I do not do his taxes, just to tell me his wife is still talking. Dad did retire eventually, not with a banquet hall. He refused another party. Instead, the employees held a lunch on the shop floor. Sandwiches, sheet cake, coffee in paper cups. No speeches until Victor forced one. Dad thanked the people who worked, not the idea of legacy. He thanked Denise. He thanked Ruth. He thanked me, publicly, simply, without making it about his pain. That mattered. Our relationship is not soft now. It may never be. We have coffee twice a month. Sometimes at the shop, sometimes at my office, sometimes at the diner, where Mom used to order blueberry pancakes and steal Dad's bacon. We talk about weather, tax law, Hannah's kids, Victor's postcards, and occasionally the hard things. One morning, Dad said, I thought if I admitted I needed you, I would stop being your father. I looked at him across the diner table. You stopped being my father when you made needing me something shameful. He took that in. It hurt him. He did not defend himself. I am trying to learn, he said. I know that is where we are. Not healed. Learning. Mason and I do not speak. He took a job selling industrial equipment in Indiana. Priya divorced him. Dad changed the company's succession documents so no single family member can control the business or employee benefit decisions alone. Hannah sits on the advisory board because she has no interest in machines and therefore no fantasies about owning them. I remained on the oversight committee for 6 months, then stepped down. The company did not need me forever. Neither did my father. That felt like freedom. There is one moment from childhood that explains my father better than any financial report could. I was 13, and the shop had just landed a rush order for a farm equipment client. Dad brought Mason and me in on a Saturday to help label boxes. Mason was supposed to count parts in bins. I was supposed to write the counts on clipboards and tape labels to cardboard. By noon, Mason was outside throwing gravel at the loading dock sign with 2 boys from the neighborhood, and I was still inside counting brackets. I found a mismatch. One bin was short 32 pieces. I told Dad. He was tired, sweaty, already angry because the order had to leave by Monday. Are you sure? I showed him the sheet. He looked toward the open dock door where Mason was laughing, then back at me. Count again. I did, still short. Dad cursed. Went through the bins himself and found the missing pieces in a scrap box Mason had shoved aside because he wanted to leave early. The shipment was saved. The client never knew. Dad slapped Mason on the back later and said, Pay attention next time, son. To me, he said, you do love catching people. I was 13. I had not caught anyone. I had counted. That became the pattern of my life. Mason made messes. I identified them. The family treated the identification as worse than the mess because the mess could be loved through, laughed off, made part of the golden boy charm. My noticing required a change. Change feels like accusation to people who live on excuses. So they turned me into the problem, the cold one, the sharp one, the one who kept score. They never asked why the score was always needed when Mason played. My mother tried to balance it when she could, but even she did it softly. Too softly. She would come to my room after Dad dismissed me and sit at the edge of my bed, rubbing lotion into her hands. Your father does not mean to make you feel small, she would say. Then why does he keep doing it? She would sigh. Because he understands Mason's need to be believed better than your need to be seen. At the time, I hated that answer because it sounded like an excuse. Now I think it was the most accurate sentence anyone ever said about our family. Mason needed belief. Dad gave it like oxygen. I needed recognition. Dad treated it like vanity. After Mom died, there was no one left to translate the wound. Dad's grief made him harder. Mason's grief made him more performative. Mine made me efficient, which only confirmed what they already thought. I organized hospice bills, funeral invoices, insurance forms, death certificates, thank you cards, casserole dishes, and the final hospital statement. I found a duplicate charge for medication and got it reversed. Aunt Lorraine told someone at the funeral lunch only Natalie could audit her mother's death. I heard it from the hallway. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and laughed silently until I cried. Because she was wrong. I did not audit my mother's death. I made sure nobody overcharged my father for the last week of her life. That is a kind of love too. It is just not the kind people clap for. The correction process with the retirement plan had its own kind of terror. When you are dealing with protected employee money, every step has to be clean enough to survive the eyes of people who have no reason to love you. Ruth made that clear. No family heroics, she said. No private side deals. No cash disappearing into company accounts. No we'll fix it later. We do this as if a regulator is already in the room, because someday one might be. So we built the room for them. We created a chronology. Payroll dates, contribution withholding dates, required remittance deadlines, actual remittance dates, missing funds, restored funds, lost earnings calculations, employee by employee schedules, authorization chains, email exports, bank confirmations. Every time Mason's name appeared, Ruth circled it in red. Every time Dad's signature appeared, we flagged it for review. I had nightmares during those months. In one, Victor stood at the shop door holding an empty retirement statement while Dad told him to ask me why. In another, Mason fed paper into a machine until it turned into dust and everyone clapped because the dust was labeled legacy. I would wake up with my jaw aching and check the restoration spreadsheet at 3 a.m., like numbers could tuck me back into bed. The worst fear was that I would make one mistake and confirm everything. Dad believed that the spreadsheet daughter was arrogant, that she had interfered, that she had ruined what real workers built. Ruth caught me spiraling once and said, "Natalie, precision is not arrogance. It is how you protect people who do not know they need protecting." I taped that sentence to my monitor. Precision is not arrogance. For months, it was the closest thing I had to prayer. Denise became my unlikely co-conspirator, though she would hate that word. She preferred temporary documentation partner, which sounds exactly like something a payroll supervisor would say while secretly saving a company. She sent files from her personal email only after Ruth created a secure channel. She wrote memos after every conversation with Mason. She reconstructed missing contribution batches from payroll exports and bank drafts. She found a drawer of old authorization forms that proved what Dad's real signature looked like before Mason's versions began appearing. She also found the note that made me understand Mason had crossed from panic into strategy. It was on a yellow sticky note attached to a file folder in Mason's desk. Hold plan remits until MB clears. D will backdate if needed. D. Denise. She photographed it before putting it back. When she sent it to me, her message said, "I never agreed to backdate anything. I am scared." I called her immediately. "Denise, listen to me. You are not alone in this anymore." She cried for exactly 30 seconds, then apologized for being unprofessional. I said, "You work in payroll. Crying after finding a felony sticky note is allowed." She laughed through tears. That tiny laugh mattered. It reminded me that the story was not only Dad and Mason and me. It was Denise sitting under fluorescent lights with fear in her drawer. It was Victor and his wife at their kitchen table. It was people whose names never appear in family speeches, but whose lives are shaped by the decisions men make while calling themselves legacy. That is why I stayed. Not for Dad's approval, for them. Ruth and I also discovered that Mason had been grooming the retirement party as a legal event, not just a celebration. He had lined up a photographer, a videographer, and a local business reporter who wrote soft profiles about family companies. The transition announcement was supposed to become public record by Monday morning. Photos of Dad handing Mason a symbolic key, quotes about continuity. A little article titled Bennett Machine Works, enters new generation. That mattered because vendors and lenders love public confidence. Mason needed the image of succession to buy time. If the world believed Dad had passed the torch, Mason could renegotiate debts, pressure hesitant suppliers, and frame any later investigation as bitterness from a sister who resented not being chosen. He was not just stealing money, he was preparing a narrative. That is what truly enraged me. The money could be restored, the paperwork could be corrected, but the narrative would have buried me again. If I had waited until after the party, Mason would have said I attacked him because Dad chose him. The family would have believed it. The town might have believed it. Employees would have been confused. Dad would have dug into pride even harder, because admitting the truth after public succession would have made him look foolish. Mason knew that he understood shame better than accounting, so he built a trap out of applause. I walked into that party, knowing it might be the last moment before his version hardened. That is why the folder was in my bag. Not because I wanted to use it, but because I had learned that waiting for men like Mason to do the right thing is just giving them time to organize witnesses. The day after the parking lot collapse, I went to Mom's grave. I had not planned to. I drove there without deciding, the way grief sometimes takes the wheel when you are too tired to argue. Her grave is under a maple tree in St. Agnes Cemetery, near the back, where the ground slopes toward a small pond. Dad had chosen the plot because Mom liked trees. I had chosen the stone because Dad could not make decisions that week. Granite, simple, her name, dates, and the line she used to say when life got strange. Tell the truth and bring a sweater. I stood there with the Navy folder copy under my arm like an idiot. Did I do it wrong? I asked her. The cemetery offered no answer, because cemeteries are rude like that. I sat in the grass and told her everything. The party. The folder. Dad screaming. Victor speaking. Mason's face. The way my hands shook afterward. I told her I had saved the employees, but maybe destroyed the last version of the family she had tried to hold together. I told her I was angry at her for asking me to carry things in the dark. I told her I loved her. Both were true. A groundskeeper drove by on a mower and pretended not to see me crying into corporate documents. Eventually, I opened the folder and took out the speech page Dad had later given me. I did not have it yet that morning, but in my memory the moments sit close together. Mom's grave, Dad's crossed out line, failure torn through paper. What I did have was her old note, the one she wrote before she died. I read the final line again. You do not have to be invisible to be strong. I had missed that line for years because the earlier sentence, do it anyway, was louder. Maybe grief highlights only what pain is ready to use. That day, under the maple tree, I finally saw the rest. I should also tell you about Priya because she is easy to flatten into Mason's wife and nothing more. She was standing near the cake when Dad opened the folder and her face changed in a way I will never forget, not dramatic shock. Recognition, the slow, terrible recognition of someone seeing the missing pieces of her own life click into place. After the party, she called me from a grocery store parking lot. I could hear her children arguing in the back seat. Did he use the house line of credit too? She asked. I closed my eyes. I do not know. He told me the second mortgage was for equipment. It may have been. He told me not to worry about statements. I did not say anything. Sometimes silence is the only kindness you can offer, when a person is discovering how many rooms in her life had false floors. She said, I thought you hated him. I was afraid of him being trusted without verification. That is different. Yes. Priya helped Ruth later, quietly. She provided loan statements, emails, and a copy of the side entity paperwork Mason had kept in a box under camping gear. She did not do it to help me. She did it because she had 2 children and a mortgage and needed reality more than marriage performance. I respected that. One afternoon, months later, she sent me a message. I used to think you were cold. I think now you were the only one not performing. I stared at that sentence for a long time, then I wrote back. Performance is expensive. She replied, I am learning. My father's public correction was harder for him than the private apology. Ruth insisted on it because employee trust had been damaged, and because Dad had humiliated me publicly in a room where many of those same employees sat. She did not say the second reason to him at first. She said it to me. Private apologies fix private harm, Ruth said. He made this public. I almost told her I did not need it. She looked at me over her glasses. Need is not the only standard. Accuracy matters. So Dad did it. At the shop meeting, after explaining the retirement plan correction, he turned toward me. His face was red. The old Ray Bennett would have made a joke to escape discomfort. The new, bruised version did not. At my retirement party, he said, I called my daughter a failure. I did that in front of many of you. It was false. It was cruel. And it was the kind of statement a proud man makes when he would rather insult the person warning him than admit he has been wrong. You could hear the air conditioner click on. He continued, Natalie saw what I would not look at. She protected your accounts and this company while I was praising the wrong person. I am sorry, Natalie. In front of the people who heard me say otherwise, I am saying now that you did not fail this family. We failed you. I had prepared myself to stay still. I did not manage it. I cried, just once, silently, before wiping my face. Nobody looked away. That was strange, too. For once, my emotion did not become evidence against me. It was allowed to be human. There was one last document I added to the folder months later, just for myself. Not a bank record. Not a forensic report. A photograph from the new oversight meeting. Dad at one end of the conference table, Denise beside the outside fiduciary, Hannah doodling in the margin of her agenda, me with a pen in my hand. Nobody at the head like a king. On the back, I wrote, This is what legacy looks like when nobody gets to own the truth alone. That is what changed most. The company did not become perfect. Dad did not become gentle. Hannah did not suddenly love governance documents. I did not become the daughter who stays for every dinner, but the old arrangement broke. Mason was no longer the center of gravity. Dad's pride no longer got to outrank employee safety. My competence was no longer treated like a personality flaw when it saved the room. Sometimes justice is not the villain punished. Sometimes justice is a table rearranged, so the person who carried the fire extinguisher is not asked to sit outside while everyone praises the smoke. I still keep that photograph behind the folder, not on the wall. Some victories are too private for frames. They do not need visitors. They need to remind the person who survived them that she was never the weak one, only the quiet one, and quiet was never the same as wrong, ever. And for once, everyone finally knew exactly whose work had kept the roof from falling. That night, I keep a copy of the Navy folder in my office safe, not because I need to reread it, because sometimes memory becomes too kind when enough time passes. It starts sanding down sharp edges. It says maybe he did not mean it. Maybe Mason was desperate. Maybe I should have spoken sooner. Maybe public truth was too much. Then I remember the cake table. I remember my father saying failure. I remember nobody defending me, and I remember walking out with my hands shaking only after the door closed. The folder reminds me that truth did not create the wound. It ended the performance. Near the end of this video, I want to ask you something directly. I pinned a question in the comments. If your father humiliated you in front of the whole family after you secretly saved his retirement and employees' pensions, would you forgive him? Or would you walk away for good? Go to that pinned comment and tell me your honest opinion. I want to know what you would do in Natalie's place. And if this story reached you, please like this video and subscribe to She Chose Herself. Your support helps this reach another quiet person being called cold by the people who never saw what they carried in the dark. My dad called me the family failure at his retirement party. I gave him one folder and left. Moments later, he learned the son he praised had forged his name, damaged the pension plan, and nearly destroyed the company he was supposed to inherit. He also learned the daughter he mocked had restored the accounts, protected the employees, and saved his retirement before anyone else knew there was a fire. I did not hand him that folder to destroy him. I handed it to him because I was done letting a lie use my name as furniture. Sometimes the last word is not shouted. Sometimes it is printed, tabbed, copied, and placed beside a retirement cake. Then you walk out and let the paper talk.